Welcome to Raven Talk, the official podcast of the Raven Tribe. The Raven Tribe is a home for warriors on the path, and is dedicated to training warriors for the battlefield of life. Visit us on the web at theraventribe.com, where you can learn more information on membership, warrior training, as well as links to our official YouTube channel, Facebook group, apparel store, and our official bookstore, Marshall Books.
Jon, how are you doing tonight?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Good, Jon. Glad to have you on the show. We've been trying to get you on here for quite a while, and it's been kind of a comedy of errors, with scheduling, but I'm glad to finally get you on. It's definitely looking forward to this interview. Jon, before we get started, can you please do me a favor and just give us a brief introduction of yourself for the listening audience at home? Let them know who you are, where you got started in the arts, and what you're doing today.
I started training in JKD and Wing Chun in the mid-1980s. Prior to that, I had done some boxing and wrestling, limited amount. Felt like I really needed to do something else because, the boxing and wrestling, although it will keep you alive in a street fight for a bit, it won't do everything you need to have done. So I found a JKD instructor and started training with him for a while, and then I met his instructors, Santo and Francis Fong and Larry Hartzell, and my Thai boxing instructor, Master Chai. And I started training with them from about 86 until now. I still am actively training with my teachers. So that's basically who I trained with, and what I do is like I said in the beginning, I want to do it for the street effective part of it. I'm not really interested in the sports anymore. And so my version of methods I teach are, directed a lot more toward mindset than some other people might.
Now, Jon, I've often heard of Jeet Kune Do referred to as non-classical Kung Fu. The Wing Chun that you've studied, have you studied a classical version of Wing Chun?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I studied classical Wing Chun under Master Francis Fong. He does a version that's not exactly like you see. Dick Van's version is more fist fighting art, or Ju Wan's version is more let's call it just a killing art. It's if you want to be an assassin, it would be a good art to study. But it's traditional in the sense that it is very internal, and the study and teaching of it is very, very traditional. It takes about 15 years to get the trust of the instructor before you really get to learn the system.
Now, Jon, these two arts are very interrelated, especially in the Jeet Kune Do community. Tell me about how you approach the teaching of these arts. Do you focus on one more than the other? Do you teach all of your students both arts? Do you kind of pick and choose what you teach to what students?
Yeah, really, because I teach for money, I let my students kind of decide what they want to do, which that's not the way I would have it. I would just say, here's what I'm going to teach you. You have to learn it. But I have students that, are particular. They want Filipino martial arts, or they want JKD, or they want Wing Chun. And so that's why I have to have a separate class for each. Otherwise, I really wouldn't separate them. I would still teach the depth, but I would not teach them separately.
Now, Jon, let me ask you, just from your own personal preference and, what works for you, your personality, your body type, what have you found is the ideal recipe for, your self-defense needs? Did you find yourself leaning more towards the traditional Wing Chun, or find yourself leaning more towards the eclectic Jeet Kune Do concepts?
Yeah, that's a great question because you might not want the answer, but to me, okay, there's no difference between the two. Because if you talk about, let's just say, Wing Chun Kung Fu or Wing Chun Kung Fu, what that means is that's the training method. And the training method is is developing skill and developing, physical attributes, those kinds of things. And then you have Jeet Kune Do over here. Well, Jeet Kune Do has a classical method behind it. It's called Jun Fan Gong Fu. If you're studying Jun Fan Gong Fu, really that would be the classical method of JKD. It has a foundation, it has a set curriculum, and then you build that up, and then you utilize what you take from that, and that's what we call Jeet Kune Do. So in essence, for me, if you ask me to do Jeet Kune Do in a situation, you just said, here's 3 guys use Jeet Kune Do to beat them. Then you lined the same 3 guys up and said the same thing and said use Wing Chun to beat them. Then you lined them up and said use Filipino. It would all look exactly the same. And like Bruce Lee said, what is JKD? It's expressing the human body honestly. And so Wing Chun is that.
Now, I'm sure some purists would argue with you on, the point of body mechanics and the way things are interpreted and expressed in application. It's like with any martial arts.
Yeah, you're right.
You're going to get a lot of variation on opinions. But what do you say to people that may question you on that? They may say, well, what about this? This is how this art's been done and how it's been applied, and this camp over here may do it very differently. Where do you fall on that kind of situation?
I would just say, you don't understand the art then. If that's what you say, if that's what they say, they don't really fully understand the art. Because if you do fully understand Wing Chun, for instance, it is JKD in the sense that you utilize certain things to develop your body mechanics. Let's just say we utilize Wing Chun to change our instinctive movements to flinch or block or duck or cower, whatever your natural instinct is in that moment, and you change that into something that's gone through a structural, perfect body mechanics, let's call it. But then when you take that out into real life, you don't apply it like that because there is no situation where you're going to be faced with a wooden dummy, and there's no situation where you're going to be faced with a man who throws a perfect Wing Chun punch. And so, your application of Wing Chun, to me, is I will use the simplest thing that I possess that's in my possession to end the fight as quickly as possible. And so I'll do the same thing with JKD, and I'll do the same thing. So a person who says, they're mechanically different, there's structural differences, that's in the training methods. In the fighting arts, they're exactly the same. JKD doesn't have forms. We know that. But, so there's a different process to reach the same goal. That's what I would say. But once you understand it and you've done the whole thing, you're going to come to that conclusion. However, if you're a JKD man and you don't really study Wing Chun, you won't know that. And if you're a Wing Chun man and you don't study JKD, it will take you longer to see that.
Now, John, let me ask you this. Both of these arts have various camps affiliated with them. And I'd like to maybe get started with Jeet Kune Do. The term Jeet Kune Do means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And you've mentioned some of that. You've mentioned some of the classical, basis in the Jun Fan. Some people will look at Jeet Kune Do depending on what era it was maybe taught. And again, there's different camps that look at it differently. Some people look at it as a set of hard skills. Some people look at it as a philosophy. I kind of feel like I know where you chime in on this. What are your thoughts on the divisions within Jeet Kune Do and the way that people kind of categorize themselves?
Can I be brutally honest?
Absolutely.
I think it's because they're dickheads. I don't know if I can say that or not, but you can edit that out if you feel like you want to.
No, feel free to speak freely. It's fine.
Because they're so stubborn in their own beliefs, they won't look at the other person's beliefs. And, I've seen it from both sides. I train with people from both camps, and I have students that have come to me from the other side of the fence, and they explain to me what they do in their camp, and I understand where they're coming from, and I understand that, you know, that's the way they were taught it, and that's what they're going to believe, because they have to show respect to their instructor. But can you, let's say, whose art was it? Well, it was Bruce Lee's. Why don't you show respect to him and just listen to the words he left you, and he will tell you if you're right or wrong. You don't need me to tell you that. And I'm talking about people on both sides of the fence, you know, are really arguing and fighting over their own interpretation of what they think that their instructor is saying, and they're not listening to Bruce Lee. You know, I've been kicked out of JKD forums for quoting Bruce Lee because I would write down a quote. I would just take it out of the Tao Jeet Kune Do, and I would write 4 or 5 sentences from there, and these JKD people from one camp would attack that statement. And they would say, I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm from blah, blah, blah camp, and we're all full of piss. Then I would reveal where from that quote came, and then they would kick me. They would block me from their group. And so, you know, that's something that I found. I honestly, until the internet age, didn't know how deep the divide was, and how aggressive that both sides are in their point of view. And so that's why, you know, I really don't even try to talk to people from one side or the other about that, because I believe they both have errors, and they both need to listen to what each other says, and probably, you know, help each other instead of be such dickheads to each other.
Now, John, let me ask you about the Filipino martial arts as taught by the Inasano school. And this is a very well-respected, you know, and I won't say just one art, but it's a collection of arts. Very well-respected instructor. They were able to interject an element of training into the practitioner's toolbox that maybe some of the classical Jeet Kune Do practitioners would not otherwise have. And by that, I mean some of the instructors that I've heard it referred to as original JKD or just Jun Fan, where they're working with a hard set of skills that they've seen Bruce Lee do, either through his books or through, you know, his writings,
right.
You know, pictures and film. Nowadays, it's very difficult to even mention Jeet Kune Do without Filipino martial arts being mentioned in the same breath. Give me your thoughts on how the Filipino martial arts have either helped or hindered Jeet Kune Do's growth or expansion.
Well, what basically happened is in the 80s, let's call it the late 80s, early 90s, you know, a lot of the people in the JKD community, Paul Vornick, some of the guys like that, they got a pretty good following, and they were already integrating Filipino martial arts drills and skill development exercises into their curriculum. And so any instructor who came out of that environment, even in the Richard Bastilio group, there's an influence of Filipino martial arts. So, you know, these instructors who were born of that era, who separated and started their own organizations, their JKD was what I call JKD Kali. Okay, I know that very well because I was one of those guys. You know, when I first started teaching JKD, it had elements of Kali in the curriculum, and because, you know, at that time, like I said, I didn't really teach Kali over here and Silat over here and Wing Chun over here. I taught JKD, and it had Kali and Wing Chun and Silat all mixed in it, and Muay Thai was heavily influenced my JKD. And so pretty much most of the guys of that era kind of had that flavor in their JKD, and so their students who they produced are going to reflect that. And then you have the other group of students from like the Ted Wong group, or maybe Tim Tackett group, Chris Kent, those kind of guys. They really didn't want to mix that in, and so they kind of kept it separate. And so most of the people that came out of that that 80s era, you know, and we're talking about 88, 87, 89, the ones that started their organizations back then. That's what they looked like. And so the students that came out there, you know, they're going to look like that. And I think really, if you take a JKD guy from one group or the other, I really don't believe either one will be better based on that structure. It's going to be on you know, pretty much the individual and what they're. Now, I believe that the Filipino martial arts influence in the JKD training is very, very helpful, because the JKD that Bruce Lee himself taught was all based on weaponry. It was a weapons-based system, and it was based on the tactics used in sword fighting. So, in fact, I told people this all the time. The best JKD book I ever bought that helped me understand Bruce Lee's writing was a fencing book by Vincent Evangelista, I think is his name, who wrote the book. And it helped me understand a lot of what Bruce Lee was talking about when he talks about his tactics and his strategies and his approach to JKD. And so if I'm not being too long-winded, if I am, just stop me anytime.
No, sir, it's a talk show. That's what you're here for.
Oh, okay. So now, and here's the thing, what I was talking about earlier, if you study the whole system of Wing Chun, when you get to that last part, what do they teach last? They teach the sword and the spear. When you get to that part and you start seeing what Wing Chun looks like then, after 15 to 20 to 25 years of being with the same instructor, you're going to be in shock, because the art doesn't look the same anymore. It doesn't look like a chain punch, limited art. It's very, very similar to Jake. And so, you go through a kind of a process there of understanding. Now, maybe the weapon from the Filipino martial arts being inserted in JKD is a natural progression, because ultimately Bruce Lee's tactics when he created JKD were all based on weaponry. But I didn't believe that when I first heard it either, to be honest with you.
No, and that's very true. I remember when I wrote my first book on knife work, and I shared it with a friend of mine, and my friend, sent back some feedback, and one of the things he said was, make sure you give credit to Bruce Lee for the 5 ways of attack. And I thought about it, and I wrote him back. I said, no, actually, all these came right out of fencing manuals. I didn't even look at, what Bruce Lee was doing. So, yes, and over the years, I've seen a lot of instructors point out the importance of fencing involved with Bruce Lee's Jeet Kune Do. Now, you bring up a really interesting point about Wing Chun and the way that weapons are applied there, and maybe this is a good time to look at a little bit of compare and contrast, but modern Jeet Kune Do, especially coming from the camps that have that influence of the Filipino Kali, they're looking at weapons from day one. You walk in off the street, you're picking up a stick, you're working with it, as opposed to, like you mentioned, you putting in 20 years with your Wing Chun instructor before you get to the weapon applications. As an instructor, how do you feel about it? Where do you fall? Do you prefer seeing weaponry taught at the beginning, or do you prefer seeing it taught at the end? Because they're really 2 different schools of thought, and I think a lot of martial arts will fall into one or the other, where you're either, you learn your empty hand first and then you worry about weapons, or you're learning weapons from day one.
Again, just being honest here. When I finally was given that part of the art from my Wing Chun instructor, I was pissed off. Not in the sense that really I have a problem with my people. I don't. But I wish they would have started with that and taught me that from the beginning, because that's where the power of the art is. That's where the fighting ability of the art lives. It's not in all that stuff you do in the pa-sao, pa-da, ta-da, bong-la, chi-sao, chain punch. That stuff works well when you understand the weaponry. And so the weaponry and the understanding of that allows me to dominate an opponent before contact. as opposed to me needing to make wrist-to-wrist contact. And let me ask you a question. If you watched 100 videos, let's just say that it's a Wing Chun fighter versus blank fighter. Let's just insert Muay Thai, let's insert MMA, let's insert, karate, let's insert boxing. How many of those fights, when it's a real boxer and a real Wing Chun guy or whatever, how many do the Wing Chun guy win?
Oh, geez.
From my experience,
I'm not sure.
You go ahead, sir. Okay. Well, personally, because I teach Wing Chun, I've watched, I would say, 1,000 or more of these videos. And when it's not a Wing Chun guy with a student of his in boxing gloves, the boxer beats the hell out of the Wing Chun guy. And when it's not a Wing Chun guy in Thai boxing shorts fighting his Wing Chun instructor, the Thai boxer kicks the hell out of him. And that happens, more often than not, the Wing Chun guy is getting knocked on his feet. And this gives rise to these people like Izzo and these other so-called combat Wing Chun instructors. They come up with this set of understanding that you have to do Wing Chun in this way in order for it to work. That is full of shit. The real reason is a lot of Wing Chun people feel like they need to make wrist-to-wrist contact, or what we call a bridge, in order to fight comfortably, because they do most of their training in class from a bridge. And so this creates a problem where the distance and the contact point for the Wing Chun guy is always set, and for the Muay Thai guy and the karate guy and the boxer, it isn't set. They don't want that contact. They want to hit you. So, in my experience of just watching other people, I see this a lot.
So do you think that's... Oh, I'm sorry. I was going to ask you, do you think then that's just a flaw in the way things are trained that carries over to the application?
Yeah, I think it's a training error, okay? And so, for instance, when I train my students, I start them already in the beginning. Instead of standing in one place doing their drills, I have them doing it with the guy stepping towards them punching, and punching from all angles instead of, every system is really good at defeating its own system. But put yourself in knee-deep water with a person who has good mobility, and then you take away the mobility. Take him out of the water and put him on a good surface, he's going to beat the hell out of you. So, you've got to understand your own system against every other structure, or you don't understand your own systems. And so this is why I say that, I like the weaponry, because the weaponry, gives me the understanding that this is extreme combat. The combat here is urgent. There's an intent for bodily harm. So you're a lot less willing to stand in front of somebody and exchange blows if you have knives in your hands. Which is another subject altogether. But
well,
I hope that answers your question.
No, absolutely. And Mr. Rister, that's a good segue to what I wanted to ask you next. You're very well known for your weapon work. You're one of the guys that falls into what a lot of people call the more realistic applications of weaponry, especially knife work. Let's talk a little bit about knife work. What can you tell me about how you practice knife work? Where does your material come from? What do you teach?
People aren't going to like to hear what I have to say, but especially Filipinos. Most of the understanding of the blade work that I do, whether it's single knife or double knife or empty hand against knife, comes from Wing Chun. I'm going to describe this. One of the worst days in my life as a martial artist, I had been doing Filipino martial arts about 12 to 15 years, and my Wing Chun instructor we had finished a seminar at my school, and we were just standing around talking, and he said, grab two knives. You like knife work, right? And I said, yeah. So I picked up the knife and gave him one. And what he did to me, there was one student present, and I saw the student's mouth wide open, and they were in shock. And honestly, when I picked up the knife and handed it to him, I said, "What is this guy going to show me with the knife?" I trained under Inisano now for 15 years, and I didn't even have a chance. I didn't have a chance, not even a chance against him. And so, but that's not what really changed my system. What changed it was when he finally taught me the double sword of Wing Chun. And there's a reason for that, and it's the double sword of Wing Chun has to be able to defeat the long spear of Wing Chun. And so when you apply your tactics to that, if I have a short knife and you have a short knife, you don't have a fucking chance in hell. No, nobody has a chance in hell. If I have a short knife and they have a short knife, they really don't have an equal chance. It's not fair. And by the same token, give me any other weapon, they don't have a chance. No chance. Unless I fell down or something, or you hit me in the back of the head with a rock first, they're not going to have a chance to execute any of the tactics they use, barring they have a gun. And I'm not saying I'm really not a badass. I'm not a tough guy. I'm not a smart ass. But I just want to tell you that's really where it comes from. And when you understand that and you move like that, it changes everything for you. I mean, your whole view of Wing Chun changes. Your whole view of knife fighting changes because your strategy before the point of contact changes, and your strategy at the point of contact changes. Now, once we've used those two first movements before and after contact, my stuff will look just like everybody else's. But those two movements of time before we make contact, those two movements I want to control. And if I can control that, all things being equal, I have the advantage. And if I don't control that, then, well, it's skill against skill. And just like everybody says, and you've heard this, I guarantee you 1,000 times, in a knife fight with two people with a knife, you're going to get cut. You're going to get cut a lot. Expect to exchange, and possibly one goes to the hospital, one goes to the morgue. Are you familiar with that thing?
I am. I have some thoughts on it, but yes, that's definitely something that's tossed around the knife community a whole hell of a lot.
Yeah, it's tossed around a lot, and I don't believe that, because if that were true, would there be any people throughout history that were sword fighters and knife fighters that lived?
No, exactly, and I'm glad you said that, because I'm in full agreement with you. I caught a lot of flack, especially from some pretty well dedicated knife practitioners, because a few months ago I made a statement about that. A good friend of mine, Chad McBroom, actually even took it and wrote a whole article about it. But yeah, when I was writing one of my books, I did a lot of research with people that had survived edge weapon encounters, different assaults, and a lot of people were able to get through those type of attacks, even empty-handed against a blade, without getting hurt. And like you said, we have survivors. I mean, you just have to look for them. They're there. And I think it's a dangerous mentality, because it's almost like you set people up to be a self-fulfilling prophecy. You say, well, expect to get cut. And I kind of made the comment that, when you are working somebody's corner for a boxing match or a Muay Thai match, you don't tell them, okay, go in there and expect to get knocked out. It's just, it's the same thing, but people, for some reason with the knife, it just sounds like some kind of deep insight from a knife master, and so they keep repeating it. It's kind of ridiculous.
Yeah, you're right. And so you and I are basically in the same group there, and you know as well as I do, there's a large percentage of people that are going to not agree with that, and I've had some violent disagreements with people over that subject, because what they're repeating is what their instructor said. Okay, they're not repeating what they researched and found out.
Yeah,
that's why they say that.
No, absolutely. Now, John, can you share a little bit more insight? And you mentioned that those first two controlling movements at the beginning of an altercation are really crucial. What's the strategy involved there? What's the tactic that you use?
Yeah, it's difficult to explain, but I'll do my best. Let's just say that, for instance, in this case, I had a spear, and the spear is 6 foot long with the tip, so 6 foot and 6 inches. And you have 2 swords, and let's call your swords 2 foot long, somewhere 18 inches to 2 feet long. I have a decided reach advantage. Would we agree?
Yes.
I have a huge reach advantage. So for you now, let's just say now I thrust at you with my spear. If you block my spear and deflect it with a hard parry or a hard block, at the moment you block that to deflect it, I'm going to reverse my position with the spear and then reinsert it on another line, or even the same line but from a different angle, which means then you have to block again, which means I'm going to do that. So you're going to be blocking. But if you use what we call soft energy, so when I thrust at you, instead of blocking it, you actually sidestep it and help it pass by you, you will find yourself at a distance where you can reach my first hand, or my hand that's on the spear that's closest to you, and cut my thumb or fingers off. And so that's what I mean by controlling that first point of contact. So when you thrust at me, I'm not going to allow you to make me block. Because if I have to block your thrust or slash, then I'm telling you where I am and where to go next. And I don't know if you've done the Wing Chun staff or spear or not, but it's very simple and very, very violent. So let's just say that you were able to catch and trap my staff. That would be a mistake, because it's going to get yanked out and a piece of you coming with it. So I have to learn, in order to defeat my opponent with a long weapon, to be soft, to be able to take control of the point of impact and either dissolve it by not allowing that, or when I do allow it, I want to control that. And so, you can find some. It's really hard to find any of my knife stuff online, because I don't share it that way. But you can look at some of the clips that I put out from Finland seminars, and they put stuff in that I may not otherwise want in, and you can see how that I do exactly that. When the opponent attacks me, there's no reason for me to respond to his attack if I can turn or evade it. And in doing so, he doesn't know that he missed until he's finished his lunge. This allows me to close the distance and make contact with his flesh. I don't really want to make contact with his weapon, other than to kind of draw it towards me. Describe it in fencing as a circular parry, and then you kind of slide down your opponent's blade as he thrusts to allow him to pass you. It's similar to that.
Very, very nice insight. I could definitely, envision what you're speaking about. Now, you mentioned fencing, Jon, and that's one of my next questions. Because you've studied Jeet Kune Do very deeply, and as you pointed out, Bruce Lee drew a lot of influence from Western fencing. Have you explored Western fencing as an art? Because I know a lot of martial artists tend to discount it almost altogether. I've actually heard people say phrases like, fencing is a sport, or fencing is this, kind of archaic thing. It has no place in realistic fighting whatsoever. Me personally, I'm of the opinion that until you actually look at fencing, at least on an academic level, you're not going to really understand blade work.
No, I would agree with you. Yeah, I mean, yes, you have to look at fencing, and even for me, did I ever get on the ramp and fence? No, not really. Did I research fencing? Yeah, absolutely. And it's something I constantly go back to and look at, because it has it's a pointed blade that you intend to kill your opponent with. And so, it has relevance no matter what age you're living in. And, the only thing that you could say makes fencing slightly, unrealistic to apply the tactics is that they put them on a ramp where they can't he can't really circle or move side to side that much. But it definitely has a strong relevance, and every single martial artist who does Filipino martial arts or Jeet Kune Do or Wing Chun, they need to take a good long look at fencing, because that's where the tactics come from.
Absolutely, yeah, definitely. I think it's a very important part of the overall understanding of blade work. Now, Jon, when you work with blades, do you work with blades that are only the kind of small practical knives that we carry nowadays, or do you do work with longer knives? Do you work with machetes, and do you do any kind of sword work at all?
Yeah, everything. Yeah, I have Caprica prong swords. I have what would be classified as Filipinos like barongs and bolos and machetes. Then I have a little bit longer ones. So we do a lot of people that do Filipino martial arts will in fact say, okay, we're going to train espada y daga, which means sword and dagger. And then they grab a stick and a dagger. No, I mean, we do the sword and the dagger, and we do double sword, and we do double dagger, and we also do, sword, stick and dagger. We do that too. The thing is, when you train with swords, even if they're training swords, it's pretty unforgiving if you get struck by them, because you could shatter a bone, and you could shatter your eye socket or whatever. If you're doing like a Filipino style drill and moving fast, that could be unforgiving. So people tend to use the sticks, and they tend to click the sticks together, which is, again, it's a mistake, because the point of contact that they're using to qualify their training is an error. It should be flesh that you're hitting, not stick.
Right. Yeah, and there's a lot to be said also, I think, and I think we're kind of on the same page with this. I think another flaw with looking at the stick in lieu of the blade as a replacement is that they're very different. I mean, a rattan stick is, rattan is one of the lightest, materials you're going to use for a stick, even compared to like an oak stick or shillelagh, something like that. It's got a lot more heft to it. But your body mechanics are going to have to change. You're going to have a different understanding of the inertia of that weapon, of the balance of that weapon. It's very different. I mean, even not even counting swords. Swords are a whole different thing. But even something on a smaller scale like a machete, very, very different animal than a stick. And I know there's a lot of schools out there that will be very honest and say, no, we're a stick school. We train impact weapons. But some people do say, yeah, well, we train, like you said, the espada daga, but then it's always clicking a stick around. And I think that a lot of times there is a lot that's lost there. I think you bring up some really good points.
Well, my thing is I just try to look at it as realistically as possible and cover as many of the bases as I can. And, a few years ago, I was having some sparring sessions with my students, and I was seeing things that I didn't like. I was seeing that, the success rate that they were having, going against a sword or going against a knife, was below 50%. And so then I started to investigate why that was happening. And then I kind of changed my training, and then that changed from a 50% success rate or less to a 70% success rate or higher. And that's why my view changed. Is when you hold a blade, your mind is different than when you hold a stick. And like you say, the body mechanics are going to be different. When I hold a sharp rapier, I don't draw it back to slash you. You know what I mean? I thrust, and even when I parry, I don't move it too far. If I'm holding a stick and I want to hit you, I got to hit you hard. So they have a tendency to try to generate power with moving and generating the wrist, the shoulder, the elbow, and the hip, which is a large motion. And, the way I teach stick fighting is more like you would see somebody teach sword fighting, because I come to understand that's more effective. And the time to take the stick and draw power from it is when you already have your opponent at 50%.
Well, very, very interesting insights, John. Now, John, I want to move on to the next question for you. You've studied, combat arts that are much older, like Wing Chun and Kali. They have a lot of roots in especially Kali, which is more of a tribal art and has roots in real conflict. Not saying that Wing Chun doesn't, but you've also trained in more modern applications like Jeet Kune Do, which are, just came into existence, what is it now, 60, 70 years ago? What have you come away with as far as how these arts influence your view of warriorship? Because as you know, people listening at home, if you're a first-time listener, get on our page and take a look at what we do. But for the most part, our tribe is dedicated not specifically to martial arts or combat arts, but to warriorship as a lifestyle. And I'd like to know what important lessons maybe you've learned that you've come away with in your personal life, and also just get your insights if you have a personal warrior code, a way of living your life. What are some of the things you could share with the audience?
Well, I really, believe that, over the years my view has changed dramatically, but I would say that, in the modern way that we teach the art, a lot of the warrior mentality and the warrior philosophy, doesn't get emphasized. And if it does, it's more of let's just say like an MMA fighter kind of mentality that I'm strong, I'm tough, I'm brave, I can take a punch and give a punch, and then that gets celebrated a lot in today's society. For me, I really view the warrior is a quiet guy in the corner of the room who really doesn't say anything. He doesn't really voice his opinion unless it's asked for or it's needed. And so, for me, I believe that, there's a time and a place that your leadership is needed, and then there's a place where it's not. For instance, I have a couple of Filipino martial arts friends, and they teach in a church. When the church is not having their whatever they do, they let them use one of their rooms to teach their Filipino martial arts or whatever it has to be, and they'll say, well, when the church social had a gathering and they were giving up items for sale, and the guy said, I made a really nice wooden sword and nobody bought it, and he said, people at the church don't appreciate a warrior, and they don't like it when our fangs are out. I told the guy, I said, you're an idiot. If you want to help the church make money and you want to fashion something for them to sell, you should have made a wooden spoon that a housewife would buy to use in the kitchen, not a sword that really doesn't have use for sheep. A sheep has no use for a sword, So, and I try to explain to this kid that don't walk around the church with your chest out and beating your chest and saying, I'm here to protect you, because they don't want to know that part of society. They'd rather brush it by the wayside and deal with it when it happens to them. And so, as a warrior, for me, I view myself as, I'm not going to say anything to you unless I feel I have to, and then it might be too late for you, if you're making the wrong decision. That's the way I see it, and it bleeds over into my life, because really this is all I do, right? So I'm always just who I am, and that's the way I see it.
Well, John, I want to thank you for sharing that with us. Definitely some good words of advice. Now, John, before we wrap up, can you please tell me, so that the audience knows, if they want to reach out to you for training, if they want to hit one of your seminars, if they want to find you locally for classes, what's available for them? How can they reach out to you? What's the best way to contact you?
Really, they can look me up on the internet just by typing in my name, Jon Rister, or they can go to ristermartialarts.com, and they can go to Amazon, and find me there just by typing in books. my name. And if you live in Texas, I'm in Irving, close to DFW Airport, and we also have a couple of pages on Facebook. But it's pretty easy to find, and I don't want to use this expression "Google me." I think that's you get made fun of for that. But I have that presence on the internet. If you look for me, you'll find me pretty easy, and I always welcome anybody from any style or any level of skill, from beginner to instructor. I have people that outrank me that train with me. But that's how you can get a hold of me.
Great. Well, Jon, thank you again for being part of the show. I'm glad you were able to take time out of your busy schedule to be with us. Again, for the audience at home, I highly recommend, if you're in the area, please look this gentleman up. He knows what he's doing. He knows what he's talking about. He comes highly recommended. Jon, thank you again for being on the show.
Okay, thank you, sir. I appreciate talking to you.